Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's conversation is part 4 of a topic that we've talked about often on The Square because we believe in its importance and it's just also too big a topic to have in one go. And we are focusing tonight on suicide prevention as part of mental health, as well as talking about awareness and fighting stigma. Here with us we have guests from different parts of the sector, and I'll start with my guest on my immediate left, Dr. Charles Mudenje, who is a lecturer at the University of Rwanda. Very glad to have you on the show.
Thank you.
And you're also there as a consultant psychiatrist.
I do consultation in the University Teaching Hospital of Butare.
Of Butare, yes. Yeah. Thank you for joining us. I'm also joined on my right by Yvonne Wamahoro, who is a psychiatric nurse at Karaya's Ndera Neuropsychiatric Hospital. Thank you for being with us. We are also joined here by Alice, and Alice is with us. It's the second time she's been on the show. Great to have you back again. Alice is a mental health advocate. She's also a research associate to the Vice Chancellor, University of Global Health Equity. Great to have you.
Thank you.
My name is Dan Mpisi, host of The Square. I'm joined by my resident panelist, Bryna Namata. Always great to have you.
Thank you, Dan.
And before we kick off, I just wanted to ask if you can quickly have a midweek highlight, as we always do. And I'll start with you, Bryna.
It's just one.
It's just one?
Yeah.
Yes.
And for me, the question is, what will it take for us to believe victims of rape and defilement? Mm-hmm. What will it take? Because day in, day out, we always question these victims, the burden of proof. I understand the judicial process has to take its due course, yeah? But I think we cannot treat issues of sexual harassment like any other case. So what will it take?
And just before you started the show, you mentioned an interesting solution. We talked that there's actually a hotline, a gender-based violence hotline that exists, and your suggestion was to have one specific
because
violence that's to do with
because when we talk about GBV, it's quite broad, but we need a hotline for defilement and rape. I think at least it would help to give victims a chance, and we need competent people behind, these phones, because sometimes the facility is there, but the people on the desk are just too incompetent that, as a victim, you don't want to interact with them. Yeah. So I think we need, first of all, to have a mindset shift. Blaming the victims, always questioning them. Is it true? Is it true? And like I was saying, how come if someone reports that they've lost their phone or something, we don't ask them, is it true you lost your phone? So why is it that every time a victim comes out, the first question is what
true?
Could have been your role?
Absolutely.
Is it true? Yeah, I think that has to change.
I think that's a show. That's a Square show on its own, hopefully in the near future.
Yeah.
So we are here. Thank you very much, Dr. Mudenje. Thank you very much to you, Alice and Yvonne. It's an honor to have you on the show discussing something that is very, very important. This comes after Suicide Prevention Week. That was last week. We also had a young lady who committed suicide in town, unfortunately. She took a fatal jump and succumbed to her injuries. So we're here trying to understand these issues in terms of mental health. But before we begin, I would like us to read from our Twitter feed. I would like us to have us take a look at our tweets before we kick off this show, just to hear from our audiences on the expectations for tonight's conversation. And the first tweet is from Adam, and Adam asks that the first question in place, how can we spot a suicide intention? And before we go to our next tweet, this is definitely something that we'll be asking our experts. This person is asking, how can we spot a suicide intention? The next tweet is from someone called Joyeuse, and Joyeuse is asking, my question, is suicide related to impulsiveness? Again, this is something we'll answer. You know, there are cases where suicide, it takes a long time. People have been thinking about it a long time. A lot of thought is attached to it. And then the last question before we kick off this conversation is asking about data. And this person is asking that, do presenters have suicide statistics in Rwanda? What is the prevalent age bracket to commit suicide? So let's kick off the conversation, and I'll start with you, Dr. Mudenje. This is your forte. This is something that you've been, as a medical practitioner, working in the field of mental health. If you can just start by telling us, before we get to the data, what are the leading causes of suicides in this country?
Probably before I say about the leading causes, I don't know how far you've discussed about this, but I would love to first say what suicide is.
Yes, please.
Because people have got a lot of misperception about it. Suicide itself is intentionally killing. Somebody intend to kill himself or herself. And once it is done, we call it suicide. Then come back to your question again. Before I answer your question, we have to understand what is how really suicide is a problem. Well, globally, the data we have from WHO says that, I think this is the data that is circulating, but we should not just let it go like that. When WHO states that around 800,000 people commit suicide every year, meaning that at least every minute, every 40 minutes, at least one person commits suicide. Then one has to understand what suicide really is and what causes it. Then when I come back to your question, suicide itself is, as there are some people who say, no, suicide is somebody is weak, why should you commit suicide? But I want you to understand that suicide is one of the major complications of majority of mental illness. And for somebody to decide to commit suicide, it means all the resources, all the options have been exhausted. And suicide is a complication of major psychiatric illness, especially like major depression. Actually, statistics says around 60 to 70% of the people who have got major depression end up committing suicide. Again, people who have abused alcohol, they end up committing suicide at an average of around 15%. Then people who have another psychiatric condition like schizophrenia, around 10% of them end up committing suicide. And then one would also love to understand what are the risk factors. In fact, some of the risk factors that are associated with people ending up committing suicide is that if somebody has encountered with a severe loss, a loss, when you mean a loss, it can be in the form of anything. It can be loss of relationship, it can be loss of friendship, it can be loss of a job, it can be loss of a loved one. So when one has got a history of losing a very important person, then she or he is at high risk. Then another thing is the issue of people living in a difficult condition, like socio-economic difficulties. The another thing is also people who have, of course I said there must be history of mental illness. And then the another most important thing is that if somebody has got a history of the suicide attempt, because I think on Twitter I saw one of the questions, somebody does not wake up and commit suicide. In most cases, one plans for committing suicide for a day, a week, a month. It can even take a year. However, there are some issues, if I can answer one of the questions that was asked, there are some cases where one can impulsively commit suicide when there was no anything that you can assess. So such cases also exist, but normally people who commit suicide, they really have had history of saying about suicide, about dying, about being hopelessness. Thank you.
Thank you very much for putting it into context. And I'll turn to you, Yvonne and Alice, and if you can share. But for me specifically, I think the question that the panel would ask you, Yvonne, you're a nurse at Dera Neuropsychiatric Hospital. And your work, if you can inform us, give us a scale, because the good doctor has given us an idea of, suicide, its many forms, in causes and so forth and so on, and global data on a global scale. If we can narrow it down to Rwanda, how is counseling in terms of suicide prevention? What can you share with us about what's being done on the ground from your experience?
Yeah, as you said, I'm working at Ndera Hospital, And in my daily activity, I'm working with patients. So if we go back a little bit on hospital statistics, we see that the depression is among the leading cause of consultation, even of being hospitalized at Ndera Hospital. That means a lot, because the people who we are receiving at the referral level, they are coming from our community. That means in our community, maybe there are other people who are suffering from different mental disorders who are not yet free to come and ask for help. So what we are trying to do, we are doing a deep assessment. What I mean here is that when a person is coming, we take time to listen to her in order to be able to respond to her demand. And then we can orient better the person. We have the psychologist with different abilities and specialties, especially the cognitive behavior therapy, which is among the best to help those who are having depression. And we can do also the group therapy for those who have depression or other problems like addiction. We can form groups, and those groups are really very important because the patient are sharing experiences and they can help each other. And when someone is having a depression, is thinking maybe I'm the only one suffering. In a group, it is easier to see that the person is not alone.
Yeah.
There are others, and the person can learn from others. And as professionals, nurses and the other, because we are having a big team, we have a task to accompany those patients in the process in healing. Yeah.
And just very quickly, you know, before the show began, we were talking about the difference between, let's say, Ndera Hospital and Ichizere Psychotherapy Center, where you work. How free are Rwandans to walk in these centers seeking counseling? Because we know we are in a country that has a very high stigma when it comes to mental health. If you can give us perspective on the difference, first of all, between Ndera Psychiatric Hospital as well as Ichizere Psychotherapy Center.
Yeah, I can say that there's no much difference between them, because Ndera Hospital is the Centre Ichizere is the branch of Ndera Hospital. It's one services among many services that the hospital is having. So, but it has a special mission. This mission is to help patients or people coming at the center, especially using the psychotherapy approach. So that means the individual counseling or group counseling. So we take time to listen and to help patients using psychotherapies. So, and another mission, we are helping people who abuse drugs and with post-traumatic stress disorder, what we call PTSD in abbreviation. So,
and you also said there's something you also do with children.
The service for children is at Ndera Hospital. And Ndera Hospital is having many services. There's a service for children, but also there is neurology service within the hospital.
Okay. Alice, you're a mental health advocate. Before I hear from you, Brenna, and your insights into this very important conversation. You're a mental health advocate. You've been here before on the show. You're a research associate at the University of Global Health Equity. You're basically involved in this field as well as from an academic stroke medical perspective. So I wanted to ask you, what, in terms of this conversation right now, what are your thoughts on what we can do better in terms of suicide prevention and affording counseling for suicide prevention with a view to really destigmatizing these sort of services. Yeah.
I think, like, to start with, I just want to mention something about like the language we use when we're talking about suicide. I've heard both of you say people commit suicide. That is a remnant of like the past of suicide as a criminal act. We don't use that anymore.
Yes, that's true.
People would prefer to use died by suicide or completed suicide because, like the criminality of suicide just adds an added level of stigma to the conversation.
So like the way people used to commit crimes,
commit murder,
commit suicide. So what language, what's the correct language to use?
Died by suicide?
Died by suicide.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's very interesting.
That's interesting
perspective. It's my first time I'm hearing that. So carry on.
But I think when it comes to suicide and to just about any mental health issue or anything related to mental health, for me, the biggest thing that I like to concentrate on is that we need voices that have been through these things, to be the biggest voices out there, you know. I think one of the biggest things that catches my eye when the media reports like a suicide, for example, last week, is the way people talk about just one incident. And Dr. Charles was talking about this. Most likely than not, it's not one thing that happens that causes somebody to attempt suicide. It is it's a drawn out series of many things. And there are triggers, there are catalysts, but usually that's not the only thing. So I think we need to be careful about the way we talk about people who've attempted suicide and people who have completed suicide, because people are listening. There are people out there who are contemplating these things, and it's going to keep them in the shadows more if we keep talking about suicide the way we talk about it right now. So I think mostly we need to highlight survivor stories. Like we need to talk to people who have attempted and survived suicide and sort of somehow made it to like a time of their lives when they're not contemplating these things anymore. And I think, I don't know if you've been paying attention to Twitter, like during Suicide Prevention Week.
Yes.
There's a lot of really brave young people who were out there like talking about times when they've attempted suicide in the past and like having like intense feelings of not wanting to live.
Yes.
And I think that's a great start. It's a great start. I think the only thing I would say to that is we need to have those conversations in Kinyarwanda as well.
In Kinyarwanda as well, yes. That's true.
We need to have
I think they're having, but they're being had, are they being had like across the country? But I think on a scale it's more, they're more in sort of international platforms or platforms really that stay only in urban areas than
I mean, I think like when it comes to sharing stories of survival and of having gone through these things and of telling people you're not alone, I've been through it, I'm doing fine now.
Yes.
A lot of those stories exist in English, like on Twitter. I think we need more of that in Kinyarwanda.
Absolutely.
More like wider.
Brenda, do you want to weigh in before we move on to the next phase of this conversation?
Yeah, sure. Listening to them, I was just thinking about how we eventually get to suicide. And I'm trying to mind my language, after your observation. And you will notice that the underlying issue, of course, is mental health, and there are, these issues that we most of the time will prefer to keep under the carpet, sweep under the carpet and not be able to openly talk about them. And if I may go back to the issue I raised earlier of rape and defilement and teenage pregnancies, for instance, in terms of the response. when victims speak out, usually the immediate response is to blame them, is to question them. So when she's talking about we need more survivors to talk, if you're trying to suppress the voices of the victims, how are we going to get people who can actually survive and tell the stories of survival? So I think part of the approach is to encourage victims and provide safe spaces for them to be able to talk about these things. And I think that would require a mindset shift fundamentally, you know, in terms of our society, because almost, if you look at our lives, there's stigma around almost everything. As an adult, right now I have so many choices, but let's talk about young people. You'll find that not many young people are given the space or the voice, or when they decide to speak out, everybody will shut them up and say, what do you know? You know, what do you know? And I think that's fundamentally part of the problem. I don't know how you think we can get the survival. How do we arrive at that, you know?
I mean, and then also I'd like to point out something before I go to you, Dr. Mudenje, because I want us to get a bit technical. I know there's not much research that's been done in this particular field, suicide in Rwanda, but if you can give us a bit of data on that. But I just wanted to, before that, I wanted to highlight how on our show last week, it was to do with high rates of teenage pregnancies. But what happens is that even in reporting these pregnancies, it's the same way in terms of going to a center for mental health. Like you said, Brenda, there's a lot of stigma, the different elements of stigma in Rwanda. So you want to go to the doctor and discuss your issues. So I want to come to Ndera, but I'm still afraid that someone will see me going to Ndera, or someone who works in Ndera knows my parents who will tell me that we saw your daughter here. So I think, and we'll get into it, destigmatizing these services is something that's incredibly important. Because when the numbers, you see the numbers, they speak for themselves and they're a bit alarming, you know. But Dr. Mudenje, if you can also share with us the rates in terms of people who die by suicides in Rwanda, and maybe the commonality in terms of the age brackets.
Well, I don't have specific data for Rwanda, but probably what I can present is global. So globally, of which Rwanda also included, the second leading cause of death in age bracket 15 to 29, they die by suicide. And there is a recent, I can refer to a recent study.
But let me just repeat that. So the leading cause globally, in terms of deaths between people aged 16 to 19.
To 29.
The second leading cause.
The second leading cause.
Of globally, people aged between 16 to 29 is suicide.
Yes.
What's the first one?
Probably as a medical condition.
But the second one is suicide.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was saying that referring to recent study that was done, a survey that was done by Mental Health Division in RBC also came with finding that around 0.5% of the people has suicidal behaviors. So when you are talking of suicidal behaviors, these are the people who are saying, I don't see the reason of living, there is no future for me. And again, what I want to share with you is that when somebody says, I'm hopeless, I don't see the future, I don't see the importance of living, this is something that we need to take serious. Yes. Don't ignore. Whenever somebody says, I feel exhausted, I feel useless, I feel like it's better to end my life, then you have to take it very serious and do further assessment and see really whether this is really, and you assess the severity of the suicide. Otherwise, somebody just is saying a word that I'm tired of living, I would better die. This is something as professionals, we don't just take it very minor like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And just to answer the question that I asked you, the leading cause globally before suicide is actually road injury.
Road injury.
Just for your information.
Wow.
Road injuries between Jiraya Mahoro. Yeah, so that's very interesting. And if we could talk briefly about this destigmatization of services, how many people walk into your institution where you work in terms of looking for, counseling for depression, which we know is a leading cause to suicide? What are the realities on the ground?
Yeah, what I can say is that where I'm working at Centre Ichizere, the stigma is reducing because we're receiving people who are somehow educated. They know what they want. They can feel that they need help and come to seek help. But if we have another view about other mental health services, including Ndera, the stigma is there. Even talking about Ndera, the word Ndera, the name Ndera, it's known worldwide. Even for people who are living there as a resident, when the person is saying, I'm going to Ndera, someone beside him will think maybe he's also sick mentally. The stigma is there, but it is reducing with what we are doing right now, the sensitization, the community, working with media, the psychiatrication that we are doing with family, patient, visitors who are coming. The stigma is reducing, but it is stay there. We have a long journey to go and many things to do. And what I think can be done is to try to connect the mind and the body. For the institution, not taking into account one part of the body, but giving like an holistic care. Treat the whole individual, not one party. Because if you are starting saying, I'm treating the head only, mental health disorders, people said with that stigmatized those who are coming to you. But if you are integrating other services, like neurology, as it is at Ndera, Centre Kundwa for children, other somatic problems, because if we receive patients who have like diabetes or hypertension, we treat them. Both diseases are treated at Ndera Hospital. This is really reducing stigma. Because
the person can walk in and, you say you're going for general treatment. It's no longer just one single service. Okay.
But also we have to continue to do sensitization for the whole country. Everyone have something to do for mental well-being, for our community, for our population. And it's normal to have a mental disease, as we have another physical disease, like malaria, like pneumonia. You can also have headache. You can have depression. It's normal. It's normal. Yeah, it's normal.
It's normal to have a mental disease. It's part of your body at the end of the day. So if you're not okay in your head, there's nothing wrong going and seeking treatment for it. I think this is what really needs to be talked about. Alice, your thoughts on this?
I think I've been thinking about this a lot for a while, and where I usually end up is on the side of we have to start teaching people when they're young, right? We have a great resource in the fact that we have a lot of public schools in this country. Like that's a good place to start with teaching mental health. But we talk all day about preventing NCDs by teaching physical health and like emphasizing exercise. We need to do the same with mental fitness in schools. We need to take a more proactive approach to mental health with young people especially. Go in to schools, open up like the space for people to talk about like some hardships that they may have. And young people are more open than older people.
Yes.
And I think like when you start at that age, it sort of like snowballs into the rest of the population. I mean, our population is majority young. So I think that's what we need to do. We need to teach young people how to do mental health first aid, like on themselves, and like learn how to cope with things like before they even happen. Like if I was to go through a traumatic event, what are the tools that I have in my arsenal to deal with this? And those are not things we teach in schools right now.
That's very true. Brenna, anything before we go to a Twitter feed?
Yeah, I was just remembering the last session we had with Laura, and one of the things she mentioned was it should be okay not to be okay. That should be the message. But the reality is, it's difficult. It's really difficult. And as also she was speaking, I was thinking maybe Ndera should be rebranded. And,
that's true, because the stigma attached to Ndera from, early after 1994 it's just, it's unfair. It's not.
I perhaps
I think people, they have to change their mindset.
Not for Ndera to change the
No,
name.
not.
Because it's putting a band-aid. It's putting a plaster on
rebranding may not be the issue. There's a question on social media around scaling up some of these services across the country. So if I don't want to go to Ndera, I can go somewhere else. But of course, that's a question of resources. But back to the issue of the youth and young people and the age that he mentioned, 16 to 29. I think anybody involved in policy, that really shows you where your target group is. They already have spaces. Social media is one of them. And for me, I'm deeply encouraged by the trend on Twitter, young people speaking out, because, there will be concerns around people who feel some are being targeted, there are malicious attacks on social media. But on the other hand, it's providing the space that some law enforcement agencies would not otherwise provide.
Absolutely.
Because now we have victims that come up and say, look, Rib, I reported this case 2 weeks ago, and I haven't heard from you. What's happening? So it's, it's good. But on the other hand, you don't want issues to escalate to where people are forced to go on social media and, say, what are you doing about this? So a bit of proactiveness. If someone reports an issue, can you actually take action, give them feedback, and have closure? Because part of the problem is some of the issues you mentioned around, depression. There's no closure on issues. If someone, forgive me for going back to rape and defilement, but that was my mission today. Teenage pregnancies. If I am defiled or I'm raped and I carry a pregnancy, you can imagine the trauma, the issues that I have to deal with for the rest of my life, but somehow society expects me to be perfect, to have moved on, as if nothing happened. So the reality of these things, I think, would require that policymakers become more proactive, law enforcement agencies. We need closure. We need closure on these issues. They can't just be, swept under the carpet.
Before we go to our Twitter feed, before we go and read some of the tweets, I'd like to ask you, Doctor, if you can just briefly tell us concrete examples. What are the warning signs? To our viewers who are watching right now, we're talking about suicide. If you can share, what are some symptoms of warning signs to do with suicide that people can look out for, whether it's friends, whether it's family, whether it's community?
Thank you very much for raising up that issue, and that's very important for people to understand. So, when we are giving training or when we are teaching about suicide, the warning signs are very important. One of the warning signs that you have to look at is a drastic change. Somebody has been behaving very well, and then suddenly you see her or him behaving in a way that is deviating from normal. Start drinking, start coming out late, start being very aggressive. That is this thing is one of the warning signs. Another thing is the social withdrawal. When you see somebody who has been socially active, and then suddenly you see this person is no longer having interest in social gathering, in meeting with colleagues, then this is something that you should not ignore. Another thing is that people, as I said, people don't wake up and die.
Impulsively just...
So they sometimes say about it. And one of the things that you normally observe is that these people, they start, for example, some of them even write a will, some of them write a note, some of them even give out some of their precious things. And then you wonder, how comes this person is giving away something that was very important to her? Yeah? So when you look at somebody start giving out some of the things that are very precious, and when you say somebody withdrawing from the social activities, then these are some of the warning signs. And of course, when somebody keeps on talking about death-related conversations, so these are some of the warning signs.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I think probably some of my colleagues can add
I
on.
thought something.
Yes.
Because many patients or many persons, before being deaf by suicide, they express themselves. Maybe what is lacking is to listen to them carefully.
Absolutely.
If you check well, you're going to see that everyone who died from suicide have given to us or to the surrounding some signs.
Some signs.
What is happening, we are not taking seriously about the expression of the person. Yeah, the writing notes as someone is saying goodbye to everyone, as someone is thanking everyone, how they try to help her in a difficult moment during his life. And you think it's normal. And another thing is those person, they are having plans, very well organized plans.
Suicide plans.
Yeah. And they are expressing in one way or another. But what I learned from them is to try to be a good listener, to be able to discover those little things. It asks us to be really attentive to what is going on, because they are small things. They are not bigger. They are small.
They're small.
Yeah, and some severe depression symptoms are not appearing outside. They are inside.
Internal.
Yeah,
Yes.
internal.
Yes.
You cannot see a person and tell yourself he's having a severe depression. You not see that.
So, you know, on social media, again, I'll go back to social media because I think that's where a lot happens. But there are always messages of check on your friends, check on each other, call someone you haven't seen in a while, because you never know what's really happening. Because, like you said, it's an internal issue. I'd like us to go to a Twitter page and just read a couple of tweets from our audiences. Thank you for sending in your messages. The first tweet we have, and I think this will be directed for you, Yvonne, if you could just have it shown on the screen. The first tweet is, can we also hear where people with mental health issues get services? Are they made available at grassroots level? Ichizere is doing an amazing job, but it is pricey and based in Kigali. How can we help people in rural areas? Before we go to our next tweet, can you answer that quickly, Doctor and Yvonne? Yes.
I think what I can say is that the mental health services are decentralized at the community level, because at every health center we are having nurses trained in mental health who can deliver services in mental health. And for some health centers we're having psychologists. It is a big step that I can say is there. And the community health workers are trained too in mental health. They know something about mental health. If somebody is having a depression or psychosis or any other psychological disturbance in the community health workers can recognize the symptoms and advise the person to seek help at the center. That's one. And at every district hospital, we are having a mental health services well equipped with mental health nurses and psychologists.
So across 30 districts,
Yeah.
every hospital, district hospital has a mental...
Yeah. And they are working well.
Okay.
And there are supervision which are organized to strengthen those services until the grassroots, as they are saying, at the health center.
Okay.
So I think the people need to know that the services are existing and they have to go there if they need help.
Again, it also is attached to stigma. Do you want to learn on that before we go to our next tweet?
Actually, she
said it all.
She mentioned, but probably what I can add on is that the way the mental health are decentralized, I don't want to repeat, but also in terms of other facilities like medication. So you can get medication that is supposed to be delivered at the level of the health center, as at the health center, then at district level. And again, what is very important, she mentioned, is that there is always regular supervision by the people who are working at the referral hospitals. Trying in that supervision, they normally discuss about the cases, to make diagnosis, to revise the better treatment. So to answer that question, actually, the services can be available at the grassroots, but probably as we carry out such a kind of exercise, then people who are following us, probably those who may not be aware of it, they get information. Probably what is lacking is the information. Otherwise, those facilities are there, and there is always a room to improve.
Our next tweet is from Kaiwanda Julian, also a regular on the square. And Julian says, and she echoes what you're saying, Alice, early experiences shape the architecture of the developing brain. They also lay the foundations of sound mental health. Disruptions to this developmental process can impair a child's capacities for learning and relating to others, with lifelong implications, for instance, committing suicide. Before we go to the next tweet, this echoes what you're saying. We should also be teaching kids earlier on coping mechanisms with trauma that leads to depression and then leads to suicide.
Absolutely. I think there are ways you can teach like small children how to self-soothe and deal with their emotions in healthy ways instead of throwing tantrums and everything. Like there's curriculums on this. And I think like we need to be, I think what we need is to be more proactive about this. We just need to do this.
Our last tweet, if I'm not mistaken, for today is from Anj.
Can I just compliment one thing? Well, she kept on mentioning about rape. Actually, to mention rape is one of the severe traumatic event, and it is, in most cases, it is ignored when people are doing history taking, and this rape is the one that would later actually cause somebody to have mental illness like depression, and once somebody is raped at a young age, definitely. This because it is going to affect the way this person views other people, the way this person views surrounding, and subsequently this person will not be able to go to school and be able to learn. So we normally get some children with some conditions, and actually this condition that children presents actually represent what is happening in their families. I think I did mention some of the causes. One of the causes of the mental illness is family conflict. These conflicts, abuse, separation, divorce, all these contribute to the proper development of children, and subsequently they become mentally handicapped and are not able to study, and they are not able to be able to compete with the others at like any other children who have raised in a good family.
Absolutely. Our last tweet for tonight is from Anj, and Anj reads, Ndera, please help people change their mindset, because when you tell someone that you are at Ndera Hospital directly, they think that you're going crazy while you're having a headache, and this is normal. asked to go to another hospital. Yeah. This is to do with the element of stigma, and but I don't think it's the purpose of Indera to help people to avoid to change stigma. I think it's to do with society.
The society,
in general.
yeah.
It's,
And I think like when she mentions like when you're going there for a headache, like even if you weren't, like what's like you have a mental health issue, you're going to seek help. Like even if you weren't going there for a headache, it should not be seen as anything.
If you go to a dentist because you have dental problems, there should not be an issue when you go to see a psychotherapist because you have mental issues. Our last tweet, last tweet, before I go to Berna, our last tweet is from Flora, and Flora is asking, thank you for a good conversation about suicide prevention and stigma related to mental disorder. So what do you do to reduce that stigma around people? What can the people do themselves to prevent suicidal ideas?
Wow.
I think those are loaded, broad questions. I don't know if we have the answers on the square, or how we can. It's to constantly work through stigma. It's.
I think one of the things that we have to do to reduce stigma is to educate. Is first of all for somebody to understand his or her feelings, and then understands how these feelings come about, because somebody who is having, as we were saying, somebody who is having a problem with the teeth, or somebody with the cancer, they don't really get stigma when they are going to seek for medical help. But we want now people to understand how does mental health come about. Now, the problem is that mental health problems have been, there are a lot of myths that are associated with mental health. And those are some of the things that we need to cut by educating people. So that when you are not feeling okay, when you feel tired, when you feel you want to isolate yourself, when you lose appetite, then you should be knowing what is happening. You should not associate with any other perception that people used to have sometime back. You should be knowing that something is happening at the level of your brain functioning in terms of neurotransmitters. And once people understand that information, then they will not feel stigma about seeking or looking for somebody who will be helping them to actually come back to normal functioning. So education is very important, and then also the way public perceive or consider people who have mental problem. Some of them are actually said, no, you are very weak. Why are you behaving like this? So people should be educated about the mental health. How does it come about? Then where do you get help when you have mental health problem?
And I'd just like to add, one of my favorite quotes is this saying that states vulnerability is actually strength. When you realize you're vulnerable, when you realize you're weak, when you realize you need help and you seek that help, they strengthen that, because the opposite of that is not being strong enough to admit the problem and seek help. And that's what leads to fatal situations.
Absolutely.
Brenna, very quickly before we close, is there something you wanted to add? Very
Yeah,
briefly?
no, just to underscore the importance of not blaming victims. Because every time you blame a victim, you're simply silencing somebody else with the same condition. So we need to be very sensitive around, when someone is talking about an issue, take time to investigate before we actually make a judgment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Education, victim blaming must end.
Yes.
You mentioned it's okay to be okay, it's fine. And your issues on starting at an early age, teaching children these coping mechanisms on how to deal with their self-care and mental health. Yeah. I think we've come to the end of the show. Unfortunately, we have exhausted our time here, but Dr. Mudenje, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
A pleasure.
Brenna, always a pleasure to have you as a resident panelist on The Square. And to you, Yvonne, thank you very much. And Elise, thank you very much for joining us for the second time round in a row. And to our viewers who are watching, I'd like you to please keep the conversation going using the hashtag #TheSquareRW. It's a very important topic. Thank you for sharing your insights and your questions, and we'll definitely keep the conversation going on our social media platforms. I'd like to thank our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee. And thank you very much for joining us, and see you again next week. Have a good night.